What if climate change didn't exist? Imagine there being no greenhouse gases on Earth. Also, imagine there not being any pollution. Do you think planet Earth would be better, the same, or worse? How would the Earth look if we address climate change? Can the government help get rid of or diminish climate change? A current issue we have right now is climate change. So today I will be talking about this issue and I'll be answering the question of should the government take the lead in addressing climate change? I'll first explain why the government should take a lead in addressing climate change, and then I'll talk about how the government should go on about making these changes. So why should the government take the lead in addressing climate change? As of now, if nothing is done about climate change, temperatures will continue to rise. In the article from climate.gov by Rebecca Lindsay and Luann Dalman, Lindsay and Dalman explain how land and ocean temperatures has increased an average of 0.32 degrees per decade since 1981. This increase in temperature leads to many things like ice melting in places like the Arctic Ocean, sea levels rising, hurricanes becoming stronger, more droughts and heat waves, and change in precipitation patterns. So there are many reasons as to why the government should address climate change. First off, I'll be listing some environmental reasons as to why the government should address climate change, and some conflicts that have been caused because of climate change. Later on, I'll be explaining the effects climate change has on us, and lastly, I'll talk about things the government can do to address climate change. I'll be explaining separately why certain things that climate change causes can affect us. First off, we have sea level rising. In the article from Global Citizen by Joe McCarthy, McCarthy addresses the issues that would occur with sea levels rising. If sea level rose, the global refugee crisis that we have going on right now would increase because the water would submerge some of the world's biggest cities. Also, there have been many hurricanes lately, so these would also worsen. The hurricanes would become much stronger and occur more often. Sea level rising would also destroy economies. There would be infrastructural damage and increased healthcare costs. Water would be contaminated with salt water, and agriculture would be harmed or ruined because of this salt water. And there would be a health crisis because of the water being contaminated. Since we drink the water and salt is not good for our body, there would be sanitation related illnesses like cholera. There would be a release also of contamination from destroyed infrastructure that would make people sick because the contaminants would be out in the air. There have also been conflicts due to climate change, or worsened because of climate change. In the article from Global Citizen by Joe McCarthy, McCarthy lists some places in which there was conflict, like the Syrian civil war. Before this war began, there was an extraordinary drought because of the climate change, which caused 75% of Syria's farms to fail and 85% of their livestock to die. These droughts also caused migrants to look for jobs in other places, which creates instability because migrants are going to different places. There was also the ISIS invasion of Iraq. Iraq was experiencing droughts and extreme flooding. This economic turmoil this was bad for people like farmers, and this made Iraq go into poverty, so ISIS took advantage of Iraq's poverty and they set out to go over there and recruit new members for them. Yemen's civil war has been called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. A cholera crisis has developed there and millions of people don't have food. In South Sudan, food has become scarce because rainfall decreased, causing agricultural areas to dry up. This puts rival ethnic groups together, which is not a good thing because we never know what may happen since they're rivals. There's also the Libyan civil war, who experiences low rainfall. This doesn't help the country's efforts at peace because they're struggling with that low rainfall. They can't focus on anything else. They have to help the people. Now, onto how climate change affects people. Climate change does not only affect things having to do with Earth, but also the people living on Earth. There's an article from Global Citizen by Erica Sanchez, Leo Rodriguez, and Pia Grauke, which talks about studies that have been linking climate change to shorter pregnancies. Temperature rising have been leading for babies to be born prematurely. A UCLA professor, Alain Barreca, who teaches environment and human health, had findings that showed birth rates spiking on hotter days. Birth rates were 5% higher on days when the heat was over 90 degrees, the temperature. Researchers analyzed birth and climate statistics. They estimated that about 25,000 births per year happened earlier than they would have without that extreme heat. Researchers believe this happens because extreme heat exposure triggers cardiovascular stress on a woman's body and also increasing levels of oxytocin. Because of these hot temperatures, there's an increased risk of pregnancy complications like hypertension and preeclampsia. Babies born too early have higher risk to develop things like asthma and risk being hospitalized earlier in life, according to CNN. Climate change is expected to bring hotter days, affecting 42,000 more births if high carbon emissions continue. But if the government takes the lead to do something about carbon emissions, the rising temperatures could be slowed or reversed, according to scientists. Some impacts that climate change has on human health is things like temperature-related deaths and illnesses. According to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, increasing amount of greenhouse gases leads to an increase in temperature. This change in temperature will affect more vulnerable communities, such as children, elderly, and people in poverty. The change in temperature causes people's bodies to not be able to regulate their own temperature. And because of this loss of control in their body, this can cause heat cramps and hypothermia. These extreme temperatures also worsen conditions such as cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, and diabetes-related illnesses. There's also air quality impacts that affect the way we breathe. There has been a change in weather patterns due to climate change, which have influenced air pollutants like ground level ozone. This increase in carbon dioxide levels also promote the growth of plants that release allergens into the air. These allergens affect everyone, not only outdoors but indoors as well, because the allergens enter into schools, buildings, anywhere people are at. This affects the respiratory and cardiovascular systems of people. Also, people experience more asthma episodes because the allergy season will be longer because these allergens are in the air. And these asthma episodes will not only affect the people, but it will affect the economy as well, because people won't be as productive in work and school, thus affecting the government itself. There are also vector-borne diseases, which are diseases that are transmitted by animals like mosquitoes and fleas. Climate change affects seasonal risk to get these vector-borne diseases, but it's difficult to know the exact amount of change this will cause because there can be short-term and long-term effects. Also, the climate variability will involve many factors like how the pathogens adapt to the ecosystem and the hosts available for them. There are also water-related illnesses because fresh and marine water sources have contaminants, which are an effect of climate change. People are exposed to this water by digestion, inhalation, and direct contact. Illness can also result from contaminated seafood. Some things the government does, because they are aware of these contaminants in the water, is monitoring the water quality and issuing advice for boiling drinking water and things of that kind. This is something good the government does, but if they set out to make changes to diminish the effects of climate change, that'd be better because it would help this case and many more things that affect us. An overall finding also from the U.S. Global Change Research Program reported that climate change would also affect food security. Climate change would affect food production, prices, and trade. It affects all these things because climate change disrupts food availability and causes a decrease in access to food. Changes in climate causes and in the environment causes contamination, spoilage, and disruption of food distribution. There's also the direct CO2 fertilization. High concentrations of CO2 stimulate growth in some plants, but in others it can lower the levels of protein and essential minerals in many crops we consume, like wheat, rice, and potatoes. It's not a good thing because those are some of the main crops we have. There are also mental health consequences of climate change. People are either affected by extreme weather events or local experiences they dealt with because of climate change. No matter what situation was caused, the effects are disorders such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and thoughts of suicide. There's also effects on everyday life because people are trying to respond to climate change appropriately. And this interacts with social and environmental stressors that people have. With climate change comes place of concern because some people are more vulnerable to health risks caused by climate change. Some vulnerable groups of people are low-income communities of color, immigrants, indigenous groups, children, pregnant women, and of course older people, especially those with disabilities. Now, moving on, I will be talking about some things the government can do to get rid of or diminish climate change. Some things the government can do that I found on ADA are it can protect and restore key ecosystems. Some key ecosystems to protect are places like rivers, wetlands, oceans, forests, and mangroves because these places absorb lots of carbon. Mangroves absorb lots of carbon, so this is a really important place to conserve. They also serve as barriers against tropical storms and floods, and this will help protect us naturally better. All these things help us in case there are storms and floods. This not only will benefit us, but species of animals. That is why the government needs to start restoring ecosystems. According to FAO, the meat industry is responsible for 15 to 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Till today, most agricultural that is grown goes towards feeding animals and not people. This is a big cause of deforestation because there is so much livestock that forests are cut down in order to feed animals. The government could change this by instead of supporting the meat industry, they can support small local producers who have sustainable practices and care about land restoration. Small local producers are very important because they help the community and their crops are more resilient to climate change. The government can also promote green energy. Many global emissions come from energy production, about 35% of them. The government can adapt to climate change by using wind power, geothermal, and oceanic sources instead of using thermoelectric and hydroelectric sources. Because the types of energies we use burn too many fossil fuels, and this burning of fossil fuels releases pollutants into our air that harm us and our environment. So if the government promotes green energy, fossil fuels will be burned less and people will be using more green energy, which is better for our environment. The government should also combat short-lived climate pollutants. Carbon dioxide is the most used greenhouse gas. Everyone knows about this one. It remains in the atmosphere for centuries, so reducing this gas would be ideal. But even if this gas was reduced, the use of it, it would still, like I said before, be in our atmosphere for centuries. But even so, we should still start reducing this because if we don't, the earth could get just worse. But there is other pollutants that contribute to climate change that it'd be good to get rid of and see a change in. These pollutants include black carbon, methane, ozone, and even fluorocarbons that are found in refrigerators. These cause serious air pollution, which has many risks on health. If the government controlled these pollutants, they could fight climate change and protect the people. But the government should not only focus on mitigation, but also on adaptation because some communities are already experiencing terrible consequences due to climate change. So these communities need to prevent catastrophes, increase resilience, and overall adapt. The government can help in leading these communities and prepare them to prevent and help changes to our climate. Overall, the question I was answering was, should the government take the lead in addressing climate change? I listed many reasons as to why this should be. Topics covering from environmental reasons, health reasons, and even conflicts caused because of climate change. These are the reasons as to why the government should take action, but also because the government has power so they can make people do things because most people aren't willing to because they're just so used to this lifestyle. But if the government is involved, people will become aware and actually have to make the changes. This is why the government should take the lead in addressing climate change. Thank you.